Ava and Carol Detective Agency. The Mystery of the Pharaoh's Diamonds.
I'm sorry, George. Ronaldo brushed his hands together as if dusting them off. It's out of my hands. However, I do have very good lawyers. He gave George a knowing look. Mr. White, Detective Edwards snapped his fingers to get his attention. Since your truck was involved in a crime and a crash, we're going to need to take a look at the vehicle. I think not. The two men were clearly in the wrong. However, the contents of the truck are not to be involved in the investigation. We're talking about historical artifacts worth millions. Then perhaps you should make wiser hiring decisions, especially in this case, since the vehicle was used as a weapon. So yes, we will be examining the contents of the truck. Mr. White turned red with anger. You, said Detective Edwards to George, where are the keys? Don't answer him, George, snarled Mr. White. Mr. White, you are interfering with a police investigation, said Detective Edwards hotly. He pointed to a tall officer with fiery red hair. Handcuff Mr. White. They're in the truck, stammered George. Thank you, George. Detective Edwards trudged over to the cab of the truck, climbed inside, and retrieved the keys. He searched through the key ring and found the correct key to unlock the back of the truck. Chopin's piano sat entombed in blue moving cloths. Ava, he called over his shoulder, you said the diamonds were hidden in the piano? Diamonds? This is preposterous, screamed Mr. White, his face as pale as his name.
Yes,
said Carol, answering for Ava.
She has to play the first 13 notes of Chopin's last piano concerto. Then a secret drawer will open.
Don't touch that piano. It's worth millions, screamed Mr. White.
We know, said Detective Edwards. I believe you've told us 1,000,000 times. Ava climbed up into the truck and delicately removed the packing materials protecting the piano. Carol handed Ava her phone. She had loaded the first 2 measures of Chopin's concerto.
See? Smiled Carol. All those years of piano practice are about to come in handy. Maybe someday someone will hide something in a bassoon and you can blow it out, smiled Ava wryly. You have such a way with words. Okay, here we go. Ava's hands trembled as she touched the piano. Chopin's piano. She took in a deep breath and exhaled in an attempt to calm her nerves. All was quiet as Ava gently tapped out the 13 notes, just as Chopin had done on this very piano 200 years ago. When she hit the 13th note, everyone gasped as a small drawer slid open. Ava reached in and removed a small cloth pouch. Every mouth dropped as she carefully poured the contents onto her palm. She and Carol had saved Ramesses' royal diamonds. Chapter 13. Do they have knock-knock jokes in Ireland? The FBI stepped in and took over the investigation. 2 undercover agents disguised as prestige auction drivers delivered the piano and other auction goods to the private auction, then left according to plan. Mr. White was told he would get a much lighter sentence if he called and told the people at the private auction everything was okay and right on schedule. He knew he had lost and was cooperating fully with the FBI. He also sent the captain a special email with an attachment called The Last Concerto. Mr. White told the captain that the first 13 notes of the concerto would be of great benefit to all who listened. What the captain didn't know was that the FBI had embedded an untraceable virus into the PDF attachment. Once the attachment was opened, The virus would allow the FBI to hack into his private network. This would be the beginning of the end for the captain. That evening, the auction went off without a hitch. The private broker made the purchases for the captain. Chopin's piano and the handwritten concerto were loaded onto a plane to leave for a private airstrip owned by the captain in Ireland. The broker contacted the captain and told him he would have a sparkling morning. Ava and Carol asked for one small favor from the FBI. Said Ava to the lead investigator. We did crack the case for you and made you aware of a hidden network of investors. The FBI agreed, of course. Ava and Carol were allowed to send a little present to the captain. Waterford, Ireland, Dragon's Point Airstrip. The captain sat in his private library filled with famous paintings, sculptures, rare books, and an incredibly ornate stand carved out of pure ivory, upon which sat a glass box with a plush velvet cushion. It was created for something very special. Tonight he wore his black linen pants, a cardigan sweater, and a blood-red smoking jacket. He picked up his cigar and drew in a long drag. Smoke billowed from his nostrils like a dragon. His leathery tan face broke into a narrow slit of a smile as 6 men arrived, carefully carrying Chopin's piano into his library. He leapt to his feet with surprising agility and pointed to an empty corner. The men cautiously carried the piano to the designated area, then bowed to the captain, who shooed them away with his cigar. They quickly and quietly left the room, closing the door behind them. The captain stared at the piano and ran his hand across the wood. He breathed in deeply, his nostrils filled with the scent of history. Reverently, he sat at the piano and closed his eyes. He had printed the music that Mr. White had emailed him, and being an accomplished musician, he only glanced at the sheet of music before setting it aside. Now, sitting at the piano, he needed only to touch the keys. The melody flowed from his fingertips. As the notes rang out, filling the room, a hidden drawer slid open. He looked down at the satin bag and then at his beautiful, ornate display case. Yes, he thought, my collection will be complete. With a quivering hand, he reached down and grasped the bag. He carefully opened it and poured the contents into his palm. He stared and shook his head. His brain couldn't catch up with what his eyes were seeing. In his hand lay 5 children's marbles and a handwritten note. Vitriol filled his veins as he read. Knock, knock. Who's there? Jewel. Jewel who? Jewel never get Ramesses' diamonds. You'll pay! The captain screamed, leaping from the piano. You'll pay! Chapter 14. A Mighty Huge Check. Ava and Carol stood on the stone steps of the Hancock Museum and waved to a crowd of journalists and photographers. Overnight, the girls had turned into local celebrities. I could live like this, Ava sighed. All of this adoration and adulation. It is surreal, acknowledged Carol. She spotted Gladys in the crowd and bumped Ava's shoulder. There's Gladys! They both waved excitedly at their new friend, who was beaming up at them. Feedback from a microphone grabbed everyone's attention.
Sorry about that, folks, said a thin man in an impeccable gray suit. Thank you, everyone, for coming out today. On behalf of the Hancock Museum, it is my esteemed honor to present Ava Clark and Carol Miller this check for $10,000. Thanks to your investigative genius and courage,
You have solved one of the largest jewel heists in American history." Ava and Carol waved to the crowd and graciously accepted the check. Ava wondered how they were possibly going to fit it in the ATM. The next morning, Ava and Carol stopped by the museum. Gladys looked up from the reception desk, her eyes filled with joy.
"My two investigators!" she exclaimed.
She rushed from behind the counter and gave them both a hug.
"We couldn't have done it without you, Gladys," said Carol.
"We wanted to stop by and thank you for saving us and for believing in us," smiled Ava.
"We're also sorry it wasn't under other circumstances."
Carol gave an embarrassed smile.
"What in the world are you talking about?"
Gladys clucked her tongue.
"You two have single-handedly made the Hancock Museum more popular than ever. The phone hasn't stopped ringing."
Ava looked at the phone, which wasn't ringing, and arched an eyebrow.
"Well, that figures," laughed Gladys.
"I guess we better get going," Ava sighed, glancing out the museum doors. "My parents are outside waiting for us. Just so you know, it may be years before you see us again."
"Your parents are that angry?"
asked Gladys. "My mom said that I couldn't leave my room until I was old enough to go to college."
"She didn't she?"
Gladys crossed her arms, a mischievous look in her eyes.
"Did your mother ever tell you about the Larson train robbery or the famous Middleton pickpocket?"
"No." Ava eyed Gladys's curiously. "Was she somehow involved?"
"Involved? Your mother was knee-deep investigating the crimes. Her shenanigans nearly drove your grandfather crazy. But,"
she looked at Ava and Carol kindly,
"I know that he was proud of her." "Did Mrs. Clark solve the crimes?" asked Carol. "She did, and many others. So don't let your mom be too hard on you, and maybe ask her to tell you about Larson's or the Middleton pickpocket."
"I will," smiled Ava. A feeling of pride swept over her. "My mom must have been one cool kid."
"She sure was,"
Gladys agreed. The phone rang, making them jump.
"I guess that's our cue,"
said Carol. They waved goodbye and headed for the door, ready for their next adventure. Thank you for listening to The Mystery of the Pharaoh's Diamonds. The next Ava and Carol audiobook is The Mystery of Solomon's Ring. Sign up for information on upcoming books and bonus content at www.avaandcarol.com.
If you're enjoying Thomas Lockhaven's audiobook content, please like and subscribe. It's the best way to help out the channel.